What year did Gene Smith die?
Gene died on the 15th of October in 1978. I remember it so clearly because he had appointed me his executor, and he died on a Sunday. It was, in a way, you could say his death was long overdue. He had not been well for the previous year. And when I got the word on Sunday afternoon in New York, I flew to Tucson, and the next morning I was at the undertaker's and saw Gene's face for the last time.
Gene Smith had mental problems himself?
Yes, he was a disturbed man. He was a brilliant man, a passionate photographer. In a sense, you could call Gene the father of the modern photo essay. He's perhaps the most important photo essayist of our time. He did kind of fall apart in the 50s, but he had a great comeback in Japan with an essay that he did with his second wife, Eileen Smith, on Minamata and the victims of chemical pollution at Minamata, which is a city in the south of Japan.
And there's a photo in your book from there.
There's a photo in the book. It's a picture of a child whose name is Tomoko being bathed in her mother's arms. And it's a beautiful picture. Whenever Gene showed it and talked about it on the screen, he would tend to become very tearful indeed. And there's a picture in the book that shows Gene lecturing about that at Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
That picture's on the screen, and there's the picture you were talking about that's in the book that he took.
Right.
What year was this?
That would have been about 1972, somewhere in there. I'm not sure exactly. I was picture editor of the New York Times then, as I recall.
You talk about the 3 marriages you've had.
Right.
What was the first?
Well, I fell in love with my college sweetheart. We had to wait 3.5 years to get married. It's funny that you mention that, because one reason I was able to do this book is I saved a lot of stuff, and one of the things I found in my files was a telegram I sent to my fiancée in Chicago the day after I reported for work as an office boy at Time Inc. in New York, 1938, because she was still in school. And my telegram said, "Start work in mailroom tomorrow. Saw Henry Luce. Love." And she was a saver also. She saved my letters that I wrote from London home. I had a son who was a year old before I ever saw him. There's not a great deal of my personal life in the book. I confined it largely to my professional life.
Your first wife died when?
She died many years ago. I've had 2 wives who died each after about 20 years. And I'm now married for the 3rd time to Tana Hoban, and I love that picture of the 2 of us. Tana is a photographer herself who has done over 50 books for children. There are not many photographers who've sold over 2 million books. And
where was that picture taken?
That's taken in the one window of my office in Paris.
What is it about Paris that so many, you call it the photo capital of the world?
Yes, I can make a good argument for that, and that was even before Princess Diana died in a tunnel in Paris, supposedly escaping from the paparazzi a year ago. Unfortunately, press photographers have been blamed for her death, which is unjust, because she really died because she was in the hands of a drunken driver. But the reason I call Paris the capital of photojournalism is much more serious. With the death of the big picture magazines like Life and Look and others abroad, and there are no real picture magazines left in England. It's been the independent agencies who are largely headquartered in Paris who are responsible for covering the world. The wire services have done a good job too, but in terms of freelance magazine photography, the work comes out of photographers who work for agencies like not only Magnum, but Gamma, SEPA, Sigma, Contact, Vue, etc. I've always fought to give photographers credit. I believe very strongly in that. And I have persuaded the International Herald Tribune to give name credit to photographers in every instance.
We have here, and it's hard to see, but it's the credit on one of these, and it struck me, I was looking through the magazines to find one. This says Nick Utt, AP.
Right.
And he figures in your book.
Yeah.
Who is he? And by the way, before you explain who Nick, is that the way you pronounce it, Utt or Ut?
Utt.
And you mentioned a bunch of them here. I've got one. We'll show another close-up here if we can get it. It's hard to get a shot of this, but it says contact on it. Right. What are these different groups, and it's hard to see there, along the... When did they... Let me start by asking this. When did they first start putting little credits on these pictures?
Well, Magnum had a lot to do with that, but Life magazine was very good about crediting photographers. That's where I got my training, and Life magazine was scrupulous about identifying the sources of pictures. That's one reason that Life is such a great historical resource. So that's really where it began. I had a big fight with the London press when I was London picture editor of Life during the war, because we resold pictures to London papers through picture magazines through AP. And the London papers had refused to credit. They treated photographers like dirt at the time. And so I insisted on credit, and as a result, one of the Fleet Street press newsletters, news magazines, published an article denouncing me as an American imperialist.
Here's one that I always wondered what it stood for, and I was quite surprised when you say it in the book. You can't see it very much on the screen, though. It's SIPA. What is that? What's the...
Well, that's shorthand for a wonderful Turkish journalist. It's pronounced Sipa, and his name is Gökşen, G-O-K-S-I-N, Sipokoglu. And he actually has a show on in Paris at this very moment. I just was at the opening last week. But SIPA is short for Sipokoglu.
And it's an agency that he has?
It's his own personal agency. He's a wonderful, charming guy whose fortunes go up and down like a roller coaster.
And who is Nick Utt from AP?
Well, Nick was an AP stringer, perhaps a staff photographer, I guess, in Vietnam. And that picture, I happened to be picture editor of the New York Times. The day that picture came over the wire, the little girl is stark naked, of course, and I remember how the news editor at the Times was so happy that she hadn't yet begun to show, because it made it easier to run the picture on the front page of the Times.
That was the little girl being napalmed?
Yes.
You can't see this one again, but here's another little credit. It says Sigma. I always want to know, who's Sigma?
Well, Sigma, you see, Magnum began the use of one-word photo agency designations. So after Magnum, there was Gamma, was founded in about 1970, somewhat in imitation of Magnum. It was also a cooperative in the beginning. And then Gamma split in two, and the offshoot became Sigma, which became as much as powerful or more powerful than Gamma. And the one-word agency name is sort of a tradition now.
Where is this photo from?
That's a picture of the Gulf War by David Turnley, who's also made the cover picture. The soldier in that picture is crying because he's just discovered that the body bag on the right-hand side of the photo contains his best friend. And I've been always a very strong anti-war person, and I ran that picture not only because it's a good picture, but because it seems to me it kind of demonstrates the emptiness of victory. That war was considered an incredible victory on the part of the Allies, which it was, but there's so many died, and the devastation continued so long afterward.
What's this?
And that's a picture by Sebastião Salgado, a Brazilian photographer who has been in Magnum. He's now freelance. And it's in the aftermath of the explosion of the oil well fires in Kuwait. The man there is not dead, he's just knocked out. He's an oil worker who was knocked out in the process of trying to cap that well. But I ran that because it symbolizes the environmental impact of that war. We just got to find a better way to heal the conflicts in the world than war.
How often in your lifetime has your work and your personal feelings crossed?
I guess all the time. When you're an editor of the New York Times, you have to kind of suppress your personal feelings because you have to try to be objective. Gene Smith, as a photographer, ridiculed objectivity. He said he was a passionate man, and he was a crusader who wanted his pictures to bring justice to the world.
This picture was taken by what photographer?
His name is Jack Hubbard, and he's now out in Stanford, but he was then on Cape Cod, on Martha's Vineyard. Scotty Rustin called me from Edgartown one morning. He said, something curious has happened here. Ted Kennedy's car seems to be have run off a bridge, and I have some pictures of it, and I'm working on the story, but what should I do with the pictures? I said, well, just tell the photographer to wire them to us. I was then at the New York Times.
This is the front page of the New York Times and the famous General Loan.
Right.
What would you call this?
Well, you could call it an execution.
He just died in this. I think he lived here.
Exactly. And Eddie Adams, who took this picture and won a Pulitzer Prize for it, has always regretted taking it. It's curious. When General Loan died, Eddie wrote a sort of eulogy to Loan. He felt that he personally, through the publication of that picture, had ruined Loan's life. I don't feel that way. In fact, I wrote to Eddie, who was an old friend of mine, and said, get off it, Eddie. General Loan's act was inexcusable. War is inexcusable, but that particular act was inexcusable. And you shouldn't hold yourself responsible for that.
Would you have been responsible for getting that photo on the front page of the New York Times when it was published?
Well, I sure did my best, and that succeeded. It came in before the early afternoon, the preliminary Page One conference that day. And I didn't usually take pictures into that conference, but that day I took it in because I wanted to make sure that everybody would know it was there and that it would get used. So indeed it was. The only argument was how big, and another picture came in which kind of played with it nicely.
These two men?
Well, Clifton Daniel, on the right in the picture, was the man who hired me when he was managing editor of the New York Times.
Margaret Truman's husband? Margaret
Truman's husband. And I had met him once before, but when he interviewed me, I never expected to go back to a newspaper after being fired by the Washington Post. And in fact, I said to the assistant managing editor who first asked me, you can't be serious. But they had, as I said, the Washington Post was very, in fact, Catherine herself has expressed regret that I ever left there. Anyway, Daniel asked me, what do you think of the way we play pictures in the New York Times? I said, I think it stinks. He said, so do I. So he hired me. And the other man is Abe Rosenthal, who quickly succeeded Daniel as managing editor, and under whom I worked for several years.
What was he like?
Oh boy, he was tough. I have tremendous respect for Rosenthal, although he finally got tired of me too, and decided to make a change on the picture desk, which I didn't understand and never have. But that's the great New York Times building, 229 West 43rd Street. But the presses no longer roar in the basement.